Let's take a closer look at ChatGPT here. ChatGPT is what I used at the very start of this presentation to let it come up with an intro. Now to show you that this actually really works, let's give this another try. So here we go. We just provided some English language text, and it then goes ahead and it will respond to us similar to how a human being would respond. Now you see that this response is different from the response we got at the beginning of the presentation, because it's different every single time, just like talking to a human being. Comes up with something that's actually pretty good. You might say a little bit generic, but on the other hand, probably better than what a lot of people would tell us. So now we can go ahead and we can start a conversation with this. So we could say, please tell the audience why AI is so exciting. So that's kind of interesting. Maybe you can tell us a little more about this. And as you see, you can ask it questions that go back to the prior context that we had. So it's really like talking with a human being. The way this works is there is a language model, and an extremely large language model at this, so a neural network with some deep training. It's not a human being, obviously, so sometimes it'll come up with things that are more right than others. But as you can see, this is rather interesting in how we can interact with it, and it just finds things that it should know because of the language model that it was trained on. And what it was trained on is a model that has tons and tons of data up to 2021. It takes a long time to train these models, but what the OpenAI guys did is they used tons and tons of publicly available information and trained this language model with this information. And therefore, when we ask it things like this, it's able to give us a meaningful answer, very much like a human being would. And you can play around with this, go to chat.openapi.com and try this, and you see how it can respond to you when it comes to things that it learned from a language model, even if the question that is presented to it hasn't as such been asked before. It's still able to come up with smart things. Now it can even go a step beyond that, and it can actually be creative. So for instance, we can say, can you write a song about developers attending a State of .NET event on AI? And here it goes. Probably shouldn't quit its day job as a AI and go into the music business, but again, it's actually not bad. I challenge anyone who's on this call or in this webinar to create a better version of this song. But it's kind of funny what it does and what it can come up with. And the interesting part here is that it is actually creative. So one of those main things that were always said, that computers can never be creative, is actually not true. As you can see, it can absolutely be creative. Another thing that OpenAI created is DALL-E, of course. DALL-E is something similar that creates images, and in fact we printed a cover on Code magazine that was created by DALL-E just a little while back. Now of course DALL-E also provides an API. We could interact with that API. Now we don't know how to interact with that API, so let's ask ChatGPT how we would do that. I would like to start writing a C# app that interacts with DALL-E 2 to generate, I don't know, vacation images for my family. And now it'll search its language model and everything it knows about this. And this is going to be a little tricky because, of course, DALL-E is a little newer, but it goes through and it actually tells us what we have to do step by step. So when you think about this, this really, it doesn't replace, but it supplements a lot of documentation that is available. So it still needs to have that documentation fundamentally available. So you need to write this documentation somehow, but then as the language model is trained from this, it gives us documentation or gives us a step-by-step description how to do things. Now, if you actually read along here very carefully, or you go back to the video recording later and take a look at this again, you may notice sometimes it's actually not that right. Just like a human being, sometimes it gives you nonsense information. It is, however, when it's wrong, very confidently wrong. It doesn't really have the concept of not being quite sure like a human would, where the emotions play into it. So perhaps you could see that as a shortcoming of this AI. Now, let's take this a step further. If you're in this event, you're probably coming from a .NET background or something like that. But what if we wanted to do something that wasn't in our wheelhouse? Let's say we wanted to start writing an iPhone app. So let's say to write an iPhone app that shows images, assuming we got them from DALL-E. Well, let's say this. I'd like to write an iPhone app showing the images. How do I do that? And so it goes ahead and explains to us about Swift and the iOS SDK and using Xcode to create that. And so it is rather generic about what to do here. Let's see what it says. So we could actually follow these steps, would probably get us pretty far. Again, like I said, these steps are still pretty generic and high level. Maybe we'll actually need something a little more detailed about that. So we could, of course, ask it for that. Can you provide a step-by-step example for this? Now again, it understands that the context still is this overall iPhone app, and also DALL-E was in the context somewhere. Now it tells us what we need to do exactly in Xcode, create views and buttons on the views, and then we need to write some code. And again, you can try this out for yourself, and it will provide different examples every time you do this. Again, just like a human would probably provide a somewhat different version of this. So this is something quite different from what I got before. What I would like is actually some code examples. There we go. So that's kind of interesting. It even provides you a convenient way to copy that code out. And I'm not totally reading along with what it does here. You can look at that in the recording. Again, it does get things wrong at times, but it's usually good enough to actually get started and go ahead and actually learn some basic things that way. Now you may have to go a little further by reading a book or reading an article or reading the actual documentation, but it will definitely get you started in the right direction. And of course, we expect this to get better and better as these language models get developed further. Okay, so it's giving us quite a detailed description here of what we should do. So that's nice. Now another example that we could do is we could actually go to something like Stack Overflow. And there's always lots of stuff going on. I don't know, let's randomly click on something. That's not very excited. Now let's grab this. And what we could now do is we could just grab this code. It's just something that's coming along on Stack Overflow right now. I didn't even take a look at this, but I could say something like this. And that's actually not bad. Understands it's TypeScript and understands it came from an Angular example, so that's pretty good. And it now goes through this and step by step describes what this code snippet does. And again, sometimes comes up with some nonsense and is then confidently wrong. But in very, very many cases, it will actually create a pretty exciting, very useful explanation of what this code snippet is doing. Now, again, this is just a language model, but as you can imagine, it's a very, very large language model. Language models like these, while we could theoretically, of course, develop them ourselves, a little beyond the scope of this presentation, but it is absolutely possible to use to train a deep learning neural net on language models. And if you do this for your own purposes, and I'd be happy to talk to you about this, if you do this for your own purposes, for something that's just important to your company, say answering things about your business case with up-to-date data, or digging into your own company documentation or procedures, or if you're a legal services company, doing something along these lines. Could actually go and it could create something like a legal document. Now, again, this is going to be relatively simple because it's just a general purpose AI that needs to get smarter and smarter. But if you were a law firm, for instance, you could probably create something that was very specific to your needs, trained on a more narrow case. And it could probably come up with something that is better than most lawyers can come up. And there's actually case studies at this point where both lawyers and computers are asked to create very complex agreements and contracts. And we are now at a point where in many cases the AI is actually better, takes more things in consideration, takes special cases in consideration, considers things that you couldn't possibly think of as a human because you can only take care of or consider so many different things. So as you can see, does a pretty good job at this. But points out to us that this is a simple version and still important to consult an attorney. And this is also an important point. Just because an AI like this can come up with documents, that doesn't mean we have to accept it as is. It just can be a useful tool for an attorney or for a landlord to get a starting point and then use that for further editing and further details, and simply just save a lot of time and go ahead quickly. So, very cool tool. Something that's out there currently as kind of a tech preview, takes the world by storm. A lot of people are playing with this. I highly encourage you to check this out because it is just plain amazing the number of things that ChatGPT can do.